What's up, guys? Welcome to Without Apology, Everyday Apologetics from the Everyday Guy. I'm your host, Anthony Cornutt, and today we're going to be digging into the third part of the foundation of apologetics. Okay, so we talked about truth, we talked about worldview. Today we're going to start the journey of, is the Bible accurate? How can we trust that the Bible's accurate? We're going to get into this, and I'm excited to start digging into this. This is a major question and all that good stuff, and so here we go. I'm excited. Let's get started on Without Apology.
Welcome to Without Apology, everyday apologetics for the everyday guy.
All right, guys, welcome to Without Apology. I'm your host, Anthony Cornutt, and so today we're going to be digging into what I consider the third part of the foundation of apologetics, right? So there are three things that you need to know before you can even really start getting into biblical apologetics. And I say biblical apologetics because you could be apologetic about anything, right? And so here we're talking about Christian apologetics, Christian biblical apologetics, okay? So the very first episode, we talked about truth. Right? So you have to have an understanding that there is absolute truth, right? Absolute truth exists. Before you can get anywhere else, you have to understand that there is truth. So if there is truth, then we need to discover truth, right? Makes sense. The second part of it was understanding our worldview, right? Understanding that the way that we believe, the way that we think, the way the things that we do, form our worldview, right? And so if we don't understand that our worldview can be altered, that in our pursuit for truth, then we can't even really begin to understand if the Bible is accurate or not. Because if your worldview is, not aligned with it, not even wanting to understand whether or not the Bible is true or not, then that's an issue all on its own. And so you have to understand your worldview. You have to understand that there is absolute truth. And then today we're going to start digging into, is the Bible accurate, right? So this is one of the biggest claims. There are two major claims that any skeptic that you talk to, they'll throw out one of the two claims. One is the Bible, after it's been tossed down after a year, years after years, from person to person, there's no way that we have an accurate version of it. It's been altered time after time after time after time. And then another one is, why is there evil? Which will be the next set of podcasts that we talk about. But we're going to talk one thing at a time. And so today we're going to be talking about what is the Bible accurate? And this is going to take a couple of podcasts, so just buckle up and let's get with it. So first off, I want to go over what the world says the Bible is, right? And so when we begin to look at the way that the world, when I say world, I'm talking about the secular world, right? The world as a whole, right? So you take, like we talked about it in the worldview podcast, but like only 9% of even the United States claims to be born again Christian, right? And so as a whole, how does the world view the Bible, right? And I think that's an important place to start, because I think that we have to understand that not everybody has the same worldview we do, right? So this is the reason why we had to go over worldviews first. So first off, the way that it is viewed. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that it's right, okay? But this is the way that the Bible is viewed, is that the Bible is strictly a spiritual book, right? So there's a bunch of spiritual books that you can rely on. The Quran, the Bible. You got the Mormon Bible. You have all these different things. They're spiritual books, right? So what that means, when you have a spiritual book, you can kind of pick and choose what you want out of it, or it's just good advice, right? So it's okay to pick and choose what you want out of it. And, a lot of people view the Bible as, like just a rule book, right? They just, just a list of rules of do's and don'ts. If you become a Christian or you start believing the Bible, then, you have all this list of things that you can't do. And so it just keeps you bound. Christians are boring, and the Christian religion is boring because you can't do anything fun, and the Bible is just it's oppressive, right? You hear that all the time now, how the Bible is oppressive and it's offensive, and all that stuff, and so it keeps you. It just keeps you there. It keeps you in this state of oppression, right? That it's both offensive and oppressive. So depending on how you read it, depending on what's going on, you can read it one way and it'll offend you. If you read it another way, it's going to oppress you, right? So, or sometimes both, and depends just on how, how you read it and how you interpret it, right? So, which again, none of this stuff is true. Okay, I want to make sure that I'm making that claim as we go through this. This is just the claims that are made by the world. Another one is that it's been altered so many times throughout the course of history. I kind of mentioned on this a while ago. I cannot tell you how many times I have heard that claim that the Bible has been altered from generation to generation to generation, from person to person to person over years and years and years. It's been copied and recopied and recopied and all these different things, and therefore there's no way that we can trust the accuracy of the Bible. And it doesn't really matter because it's just a spiritual book anyways, but that's the only way that you could view it, because it can't be accurate historically because it's been altered so many times. And therefore the Bible is not historically accurate, right? The events that are in the Bible, both the Old Testament and the New Testament, have been altered over time. Therefore, they're just good wives' tales, right? Or they are just good stories, fables, just things that you have good. You can take good out of, right? But you get into like the Old Testament and God's mean, and he's, abusive, and he's a murderer, and you see, all these different wives by, kings, and, you see people behaving badly, and God supposedly behaving badly. I'm actually reading a book right now called God Behaving Badly, and it's by, I can't remember what his name is, but he's talking about these claims and stuff like that in the Old Testament, which we'll get to, but it's going to be a later podcast. And so this is the way. This is obviously it's not an exhaustive list. This is kind of the way the world views the Bible. And so when it's viewed that way, of course, there's no authoritative. It's not authoritative. It's not anything. It's not even really a good history book. It's more of just a spiritual book. And so you don't need it. You don't need it. And so, of course, if the Bible is not real, then Christianity can't be true. And so there's no standard by which we live, because, if Christianity is not true and evolution is true, then you can just do whatever you want, and there's no consequences for anything, because we're basically just a bunch of meat robots, and there's not really any meaning to life. There's no purpose to it, which is an incredibly sad way to live, by the way. But people do. It's sad. And so, what is the Bible? From just a 30,000 foot view, okay, what is the Bible? I think this is an important question that starts off our foundation in the Bible. Okay, so the Bible is a collection of 66 books. I think that's important, right? We're not looking at one unified book. It's important to understand that it is 66 different books, and we're going to get into why that's so potent and why that's so important. But not only is it a collection of 66 books, it was written by 40 different authors. Okay, think about that. The Bible we have today, the 66 books that we have today, were written by 40 different authors. Again, that's important because, when you look at the Bible, it's a unified story that points to Jesus. And so, and not only was it written by 40 authors, it was written over a span of 1,500 years. Right, somewhere around 1450 BC to just prior to 70 AD, somewhere in that span, right? So about 1,500 years. And again, this is important because not only was it written by 40 different authors, they didn't even live during the same time, right? And not only was it written by 40 different authors at 1,500 different years, but it was also written in 3 different continents. So it was written by 40 different people who didn't even live during the same time period and didn't even live in the same continent. Think about that. So some of it was written in Asia, some of it was written in Africa, some of it was written in Europe. And so as we understand the Bible, it's not just a book. I mean, it's insane. It's also, not only was it written by 40 different guys or 40 different authors in a span of 1,500 years on 3 different continents, but it was written in 3 different languages. So it was written by 40 different people who lived in 1,500 years worth of different time on 3 different continents and 3 different languages. Okay, so all of this is important. Because when you look at the Bible, it is a unified story, again, that points to Jesus. So how in the world did we get 40 different authors in 1,500 different years in 3 different continents and 3 different languages to write a simultaneous book that does not contradict itself, that does not the prophecy in it has to date has been 100% accurate, right? And and is this unified story. So it's crazy. This is something we need to understand, because the Bible is not a spiritual book. Okay, I know some of you guys going, Anthony, are you sure you know what you're talking about? Yes. It is not a spiritual book. It is a historical book with spiritual implications. Okay, so why that's important is it changes the dynamic of it, right? You're not looking at a book that is just this spiritual overload of stuff. The events that are in the Word of God, the events that are in this actually happen. This is a historical document that, because of its prophetic accuracy, because of its unification, and the fact that it all points to Jesus, right? So the Old Testament points to Jesus, the Gospels talk about Jesus, and the rest of the New Testament points back to Jesus, right? The whole Bible, it's this unified story. It's authoritative because it's historical. If it's historical, it's factual. Okay, bing, bing, bing. That's the word that we're looking for. Fact, right? Because here's the thing. When it comes to truth, we talked about this in one of the first episodes. When it comes to truth, your opinion doesn't matter. My opinion doesn't matter. What we say, what we do, what we think does not matter. Nothing that we do changes truth. So we are to discover truth, right? Well, if the Bible is history, right? So when you were in school, or if you are in school, some of you may still be in school, right? I have friends working on their PhD. They've been in school for 40 years. When you open up a history book, how do you view that? Right? How do you view that history book? The vast majority of us, when we open up a history book, we expect the events that are inside that history book to be truth. Those things really did happen. So when you take away the fact that the Bible is strictly a spiritual book and understand that it is a historical book, when you open it up, you should automatically assume that these events happened. Okay. Now, what happens when we assume? Right. I'm not doing that. I'm not going there. If you know, you know. Okay. But so what do we do about that? We research it, right? We dig into it. We look for context in the Bible. We dig into the time period in which it was written and who it was written to and why it was written and all these different things. And you can find archaeological finds have proven the Bible. There's never been an archaeological find that has disproven the Bible. Okay, so I'm going to say that again. There has never been an archaeological find that has disproven the Bible. Prove me wrong. Right? And so if the Bible is historically accurate, how do we know that? Right? So we're going to go over the New Testament. We're going to be talking about the New Testament a lot. And here's the reason why. Because if the New Testament is true, then the Old Testament automatically gets thrown in. Why is that? Because every time in the New Testament when you see somebody quoting Scripture, they're quoting the Old Testament. Every book of the Bible, essentially, of the Old Testament was quoted authoritatively by Jesus. Not every scripture, right? We're not talking about every verse, but every book was somehow quoted or related to by Jesus authoritatively, right? You see it in the Gospels. You see it. Paul in his writings, talks about the Old Testament authoritatively. And so if the New Testament is true and they all quoted Scripture as if it was false, or as if it was true, then authoritatively it must be true. Because if the New Testament is true and accurate, then it has to be true and accurate. If the New Testament is not true, then none of it matters, right? Nothing that we do matters. If the New Testament can be proven false, then the entire thing can be proven false. And so here we go. So how do we? And I want to let you know this is going to be a several series podcast, because I'm not going to make these an hour long. We're going to try to stick to them 25, 30 minutes. But how do we know anything about history? Think about that. So back to your history book. How do you know anything in that in that history book is accurate, right? How do we know anything in the Bible is accurate? How do we know anything about any history that we know today, ancient history, is accurate, right? I mean, you look at things that are in the history book today, like 9/11. We know that it's true because we were there, right? It's well documented. I can't say we. I'm old now. So there's a whole generation that was not alive during that time, which is mind-boggling. Anyways, but, it was very well documented. The world wars and different things like that. All this stuff was documented. We have, video footage and pictures and da-da-da. But what about ancient history, right? What about like Alexander the Great? What about, any of those ancient people that we study about in our history books? How do we know that it's true? Manuscripts, right? So we have manuscripts of people who have copied and copied and copied and copied again, to preserve history, right? So somebody would get manuscripts, they would write them out, right? This person, we'll just use Alexander the Great or whatever. Somebody wrote about his adventures and his conquest and all these different things. And then the way that they spread those is they would copy them down and send them off to somebody else. They would send them off to somebody else. They'd send them off to somebody else. And then, of course, now we discover those manuscripts. And so the way that they conclude that something is historically accurate is they have to have two separate manuscripts that coincide with each other, right? That tell the same story in order for it to be historically accurate. And so where does that leave us with the Bible, right? And so when you look at the manuscripts, the New Testament alone, okay, we have we've got over 6,000 manuscripts for the New Testament. Okay. You say, wow, that's, is that a big number? Is that normal? What is that? But to understand that we have so many documents of the New Testament, but to understand the importance, right? Or how big of a number that is. The only thing that we have that even comes close in ancient history, in AD, okay, since Jesus has been here, the only thing that we have that comes close of writings is by a guy named Homer. Okay, so if you are into history, historians, different things like that, you may know who he is. He was kind of a historian, a poet, kind of thing. The most manuscripts that we have by anybody else is by this guy named Homer, and that's 1,800 manuscripts. So let me paint this picture for you. This guy, right? We count his history as accurate. We have 1,800 manuscripts. The New Testament, we have over 6,000. Right? It's even more than that now. I think the study that I'm going off of was actually like in 2012 or something like that, and they've found many, many more since then. I just don't know the number for sure. Not only does the New Testament have the most manuscripts, right? But we also have the earliest manuscripts. Okay, so Homer's, we have 1,800 manuscripts of this guy named Homer. The earliest one that we have was 400 years after he lived, right? So somebody had copied it down from generation to generation. And then, the earliest ones that we have are 400 years after Homer lived. Think about that. 400 years. You want to talk about something, but when nobody questions Homer, whether or not it's accurate or not, nobody questions him. And why is that important? Because the New Testament, the earliest ones we have, are within 25 years of the originals. I mean, think about that. The earliest testimonies that we have are within 25 years of the originals, because the truth is we don't have the originals of anything. Nothing when it comes to ancient history. You will not find, when it comes to manuscripts, a set of manuscripts that are original. Nobody has them. We only have copies of copies of copies. And so the fact that we have the earliest copies within 25 years of what the originals would have been versus the next closest, which is Homer, which is 400 years after that. That's major. That is major. And so here's the thing. It's not just that. Let me see if I can share my screen here. I'm not real savvy about this. Okay, so this come out of a book called "I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist." So I'm gonna make sure I give them credit. But if you can see this, I'm hoping that you can. These are all the years, the gap of the years of writings that we have. Okay. So think about this. So you got Caesar here, Tacitus, Plato, some of these guys I don't even know who they are. Homer. So you have all these, and if you notice, these are now this is the earliest copies that we have, surviving copies that we have. This Pliny or whatever his name is, 750 years after that. Caesar, which nobody questions Caesar, right? The history that we have around Caesar. The earliest ones we have were 1,000 years after he lived. Homer 400, Plato 1,200, Tacitus, right, 1,000 years after that. And it's like, man, that is crazy that nobody questions any of these other people, and yet if you look down here at the New Testament, it's 25 years. We have the earliest copies of anything else in history. Literal history. Well, then you go to here. Well, you look, and it's kind of hard to see there. I don't know if I can zoom in there, or let's see if I can zoom a little bit. All right, so let's come over here just a little bit. All right, so you can see this really well. All right, so if you notice this Tacitus guy, we've got 20 documents, right? Manuscripts total. Caesar, we have 10 total. Plato, we have 7. Homer, we have 1,800. Right? So not only do we have this huge gap in all this history, but we also have fewer manuscripts. Again, nobody questions. You look at the New Testament, this says 5,800, so almost 6,000. And again, we've got so many more than that now. So not only do we have the most, right, but we also have the earliest documents, but we also have the most documents, right? And everybody wants to question this thing. And so this is the reason why it's important. If I have a copy, you have a copy, Joe Smo down the street has a copy, this person over here has got a copy, and this guy over here in this next city has got a copy, and all this stuff, and I alter my copy, are you guys going to be able to tell who altered their copy? Of course you are. So this is the reason why we can begin to look at the manuscripts and be like, hey, wait a minute. If we have a manuscript that says something about, way out of whack from what the rest of them does, right? So somebody tried to make something up, which happens. We'll talk more about that in the next couple podcasts. But all these different things, you're going to know that this one is altered. This one does not belong. This one does not coincide with everything else. This one has a lie in it, right? And so this is the reason why we can trust the manuscripts that we have, right? It's not, I do not want it to ever seem like we are just throwing out, hey, we have manuscripts, So when people make the claim that, they've been altered year after year after year after year after year by person, by so many different people and all these different things, there's no way that it's accurate. Well, the fact that we have so many documents, we have so many, earliest documents, right, goes to prove that, one, we can track all the way back to basically when the disciples were still alive, right, or real close to them. So the people the copies that we have either personally knew the disciples, or they were alive or just shortly after the disciples had died. And so this is important, right? We're not just making up stories. People want to talk about how accurate people want to make claim about like the Quran. The Quran was written 400 years after Jesus, right? Like it's not even like you can't even. We had so many different copies of the New Testament. By the time Muhammad came about, I don't even know why people even question it. Right? So you have all these different things, and all of a sudden this guy that showed up 600, it's either 400 or 600 years. I can't remember which one it is. We'll go with 400. They showed up 400 years after Jesus lived. All of a sudden he knows more. right? Like it doesn't make sense. We have all these manuscripts. And so when it comes back to the accuracy of the New Testament, is it perfect? Yes. You said, well, Anthony, what about errors in the New Testament documents, in the manuscripts and stuff like that? What, we only have parts of these and, and different things like that. We're going to get to that. I'm going to save that for the next podcast. But that's got dirty in it. Anyways, so to understand, for starting point, when we talk about the New Testament document, listen, prove me wrong. Look it up. Look it up for yourself. Study this stuff yourself. I am not the go-to guy for all of this stuff. I get my stuff from people who do this for a living, right? I don't do this for a living. I get my stuff from multiple people who do this stuff for a living. And so prove me wrong. I would love to hear from you. If you could prove me wrong, I would love to hear from you. Prove me wrong. Email me withoutapology.connect@gmail.com. I would love to talk to you about it. Anyways, so as I land this plane, we have we talked about how the world views the Bible. And we talked about why the manuscripts that we have, all of history that we know, all of ancient history, we know from manuscripts. And we talked about why the Bible is so accurate by manuscripts, right? And there's so many more points for me to make and different things like that. We're just digging, we're just scratching the surface. But to understand that, first off, we have more documents, more manuscripts than any other book, right? We have earliest manuscripts than any history period, right? Any history period. When you get into, and I'm not going to get into this, but when you get into the Old Testament, we've got like 30,000 different manuscripts for the books of the Old Testament. I mean, like you have to deny facts, right, in order to be like this doesn't make any sense. You have to completely deny facts because these are not speculations. Right? These are not assumptions. I'm not making this stuff up. These are facts. The documents that we have that we can account for are within 25 years of the originals. We have so many different ones. So many, over 6,000 now of different manuscripts. And that's not even talking about like the messages. So they say that you could rewrite the Bible just from the scriptures that are rewrite the New Testament just from the scriptures that are used in pastors' messages during the early church, right? That's all he did. They just quoted Paul. They quoted Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. They quoted all these people, and they use scriptures and stuff. And so you could take those and just out of pastors' messages that we have, you could rewrite the New Testament out of the scriptures that they used in there. So not only, but that's not included in the numbers that I've given you. That's just the manuscripts that we have of the New Testaments. That's what we have. And so I want you to see, before we go any further, that the Bible is accurate. The reason why we know it's accurate is because we have facts to prove it. Think about that. Facts. So, I have a book out, Framework for Biblical Masculinity by Anthony Kernut. You can get it on Amazon. I'll have the link in the show notes. You can get it there. I hope you guys are enjoying this podcast. Let me hear from you. You need either comment on the YouTube channel, email me withoutapology@gmail.com. I would love to hear from you. I would love to know what you think. And especially if you disagree with me, please let's talk about it. And so, as always, go and live your life without apology.
This podcast has been recorded and produced by Real Men Studios.